All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 81st Annual Arkansas Historical Association Annual Conference. My name is Mark Christ. I'm the head of adult programming for the Central Arkansas Library System. And for the, until Friday, I'm also the immediate past president of the AHA. I'll be moderating this first session, which is titled Community Expressions and Concerns. A few boilerplate things before I introduce our speakers. We'll have question and answers after all three presentations are done. You can put your questions preferably in the chat, but you can also put them in the Q&A. We would prefer the chat though. This program is being recorded and will be available later on the AHA YouTube channel. And at the end of our program today, if you wouldn't mind staying on a few minutes later, there will be a survey we would like you to fill out at the conclusion. So we have three excellent speakers today. First is Deena R. Owens. She's an amateur folklorist and editorial consultant from Fayetteville. And with the assistance of Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts and the Specials Collections Division of the UA Libraries, she launched the Arkansas Drag Oral History Project in the fall of 2019. She's currently serves on the board of Ozark Traditional Arts and can be often be found roaming around the Fayetteville Public Library. Our second speaker will be Tamela Tenpenny-Lewis. She is a genealogist, historian, and cemetery preservationist. Tamela is the co-founder and president of Preservation of African American Cemeteries, Incorporated. She served on the as national president of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society and was a charter member and first president of the Arkansas chapter of that organization. She's received the AAHGS James Dent Walker Honorary Lifetime Membership Award and the Oakley Certificate of Merit from the Association of Gravestone Studies, and an Outstanding Achievement in Preservation Advocacy Award from Preserve Arkansas. She can also be seen in the ATN documentary Silent Storytellers, which is about the importance of preserving cemeteries in Arkansas. She's on the board of the Arkansas Humanities Council and Friends of the Arkansas State Archives, and is a graduate of ASU, where she currently serves as the scholarship chair of the ASU Strong Turner Alumni Association. Our third speaker is Dr. Todd Lewis, who is the lead processing archivist with special collections at UA Fayetteville. Collections he recently processed include the Ralph A. Hyman papers, which is available to researchers. Dr. Lewis was a student of Dr. Willard B. Gatewood and completed his doctorate in 1995. He's published and presented numerous articles on Arkansas history with topics including race relations, politics, and religion, most notably Christian fundamentalism. Dr. Lewis came out as gay in 1986, his senior year at Hendrix College, and he's researched and collected materials related to the state and national LGBTQ+ communities for more than 35 years. His work on Dr. Hyman marks his first time to write about the LGBTQ+ movement, though by no means his last. He would personally like to thank Dr. Hyman, a truly kind and gracious man, for his assistance in writing this paper. With that being said, I will bow out and welcome Deena.
Thank you so much, Mark. My bio was so short compared to everybody else's. Wonderful crew, and I'm very humbled to be here today. I'm going to share my PowerPoint with y'all. Okay. So in 1972, the first Miss Gay America pageant was held in Nashville, Tennessee. The winner of that pageant was Norman Jones from Little Rock, Arkansas. In 1975, Jones bought the pageant and over the next 30 years grew it into a prestigious organization that aided in the elevation of drag performance as a visible and respected form of expression. In 2021, Arkansas drag was thrust back into the national spotlight when Simone, a former resident of Central Arkansas and student at UALR, won RuPaul's Drag Race, and again this winter when Maddie Morphosis from Fayetteville, Arkansas, became the show's first cisgender heterosexual contestant. Even though Arkansas has a significant part in the history of drag performance, large gaps in documentation of Arkansas's queer community remain. Consisting of in-person interviews, remote interviews, photography, and audiovisual recording, the Arkansas Drag Community Oral History Project seeks to capture the memories of the community and partner with local organizations, libraries, and archives to preserve these resources. This presentation will also examine the project's development, including a discussion of the challenges of trauma-informed oral history techniques, a very brief look at the history of drag performance in Arkansas, and how outreach and community archiving are essential for the success of the project. So when you think of traditional arts or folk arts, what comes to mind typically is the classic examples of folk music, quilting, woodworking, etc. So what about drag? Let's begin by talking about how we define traditional arts. The discipline of folklore has debated this definition for decades, and if you go to the American Folklore Society's website, instead of one neat and tidy definition, you'll find a list of different versions throughout the years. Folklore generally escapes easy definition, as you can see. However one chooses to describe it, though, key components remain consistent. It's tradition rooted within community, a word which itself has warranted its own debates, and learned within communities. Tradition should not imply old. Traditions may be deeply rooted or new and emerging, and new traditions are created every single day. So for the purposes of this project, we are using Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts definition. So we're going to define folk art as community-based traditions with an artful or skillful component. That is, it must be rooted in and shared and learned within communities, and the communities are the ones who decide what makes a tradition artful or not. With this definition in mind, one can easily see that there's so much more to Arkansas folk life than those more obvious traditions. Through the Arkansas Drag Community Oral History Project, we are seeking to challenge the general public's definition of folk art. Only by challenging these assumptions can state folk art programs offer diversity and representation programming. So in this project, we seek to showcase the art of drag. There is an inherent skill and art to it, and if you don't learn it in a textbook, you learn it from drag performers that have come before you. Folklorists like to talk about how the folk arts apprenticeship is the ideal way of passing on tradition. And the drag community has developed their own form of an apprenticeship, manifested through drag houses with drag mothers and children. Drag families often serve as the tradition bearers of the occupation, heavily influencing the culture and future generations of performers. The drag family grows when an established performer invites someone who wants to learn the craft to be a part of her group of performers. These families take on the same last name and will also often have a cohesive creative style. At its heart, drag families are classical, traditional apprenticeships. Even better, they didn't need a folk arts organization to inspire them. They're organically part of the tradition of drag. So in short, for folklorists, drag is classic traditional arts. Although drag performance welcomes differences in style and presentation for each performer, there's a general framework that characterizes the occupation, elements such as costuming and makeup artistry that follow certain community standards and folk ways of style and gender exaggeration. So this project began in the fall of 2019 when Virginia Siegel, who is the coordinator for Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts, and I were sort of mingling at a reception at the University of Arkansas Libraries. And as we were chatting, the conversation turned to Virginia's interest in the drag community that she brought with her from her previous position in Kentucky. And myself, having spent many years involved in the local drag community, I was happy to clue her in on our drag culture. And as we were talking about the importance of documenting Arkansas's drag history, I also shared Arkansas's unique and important role in the formation of drag culture throughout the entire United States. As I mentioned, Norman Jones / Norma Christie, that's her stage name, influence has given Arkansas a central and historic role in the development and proliferation of drag through the 30 years spent building the Miss Gay Arkansas America pageant, which is the oldest official preliminary for Miss Gay America. Today, there are many pageant systems, including Miss Gay US of A, Miss Continental, and a plethora of others for not only traditional drag queens, but also for drag kings, folk queens, which are cisgender women, also known as diva queens, non-binary folks, and trans women. For many performers, pageants are the gateway to bigger careers, and for some, they are a rite of passage that leads to greater visibility and respect from their peers. So our first interview was actually with Patty Johnson, and Patty is a cisgender woman she's a folk queen whose stage name is Lady Cakes Monroe. She's a drag daughter to Taylor Madison Monroe, who was a prominent drag performer in Fayetteville and former Miss Gay United States. While drag families are an important part of drag culture, like traditional families, they can have their difficulties. And at some point after our interview, those two went their separate ways, and she is just now known as Lady Cakes, and she has her own drag children, both male and female, and everywhere in between. As is tradition, they take on her last name, which is Cakes. So for example, Candy Cakes, who is another folk queen, is the stage name of one of her children. There are many, the fact that our first interview was with a woman wasn't a statement on our part. It's just how circumstances aligned. We've also done interviews with transgender performers, cisgender male performers, genderqueer performers, and those who are considered drag adjacent, such as people who don't perform but have valuable memories to share of the shows themselves. Patty is a very involved and prominent member of the Northwest Arkansas drag community. She hosts in her kitchen a drag lab in which performers or those who have skills they want to share work on costumes and plan events. It was at this table we conducted this interview in her home, in a space where she actively works on her craft. When we concluded the interview, Patty excitedly showed us her room where she kept all of her costumes, including all of her amazing wigs. And one of the perils of fieldwork is that you might have a time like this where you don't actually record the whole encounter. We did, however, take a few photographs. We enjoyed this scarf with the pins, but these are her wigs. In the top left corner, she was actually crowned in that wig when she was crowned as Miss Arkansas US of A Diva in 2017. And the two right next to that were ones that she used as her performance. The white one that sticks up was actually for an Ursula costume. It's pretty amazing. So also during that interview, we discussed the chapter of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, the Hillbilly Harlots, which is an activist organization that uses drag and camp to raise awareness for issues related to the queer community. It's considered a ministry, and depending on who you talk to, it's considered more drag adjacent, but it's an important part to capture these conversations as part of the queer experiences of Arkansas in the last 20 years. And another goal of the project is kind of to pick up, beyond the unnatural state. So in his book, The Unnatural State, Arkansas and the Queer South, Brock Thompson captured much of the early history and genesis of drag in Arkansas, particularly documenting womanless weddings and GI drag shows on Arkansas military bases. He interviewed many of the elders of the Arkansas drag community, but there are more stories that we need to get from that time. His history of the topic relates more to a hidden history of drag until around the time the Miss Gay America pageant system begins. The section on drag kind of ending with a wonderful profile on Fonda LaFemme, who is one of the most notable and beloved performers in the last 30 years. The book was published by the UA Press in 2010 and has remained the definitive work on queer history since. It is with the 50th anniversary of the Miss Gay America pageant that this project is a timely contributor to the preservation of the history of the Arkansas queer community. And as one of our stakeholders so concisely put it, drag history is queer history. It is a history of the entire community, and it deserves more. And our goal is to glean what we can from the rest of the community. With time and the pandemic against us, these older members of the community hold vast knowledge of the art form and their experience in a state where to this day there is a fight all the time against them. While dredging up these memories of a long past may be difficult, they are essential knowledge for current and future generations. And one of our biggest concerns of collections in current repositories is the issue of discoverability. I wanted to mention this because one of the most discoverable collections right now, there aren't very many, there's not a whole lot, but I really just wanted to use this photo of Harvey Goodwin. So the Harvey Goodwin collection at UALR is one of the most prominent drag collections that we have in the state, and so fantastic. So I just really wanted to throw this photo in there. But there's not a lot, when I worked in special collections, searching for drag and queer history can feel like ghost hunting. Elizabeth Finley Shores said it, and probably might even say it again this week, that you look for coded language, you have to know what you're looking for sometimes, because people really did have to hide. The gap in the records is very heartbreaking, because sometimes you have to tell a researcher, you have to look somebody who is queer dead in the face and say, I don't have anything for you. And representation in archives does matter, in particular in a conversation with Multnomah County Oregon Archivist Terry Baxter regarding the DEI issues. We both noted how the AIDS epidemic stole not only hundreds of thousands of people from us, but also their memories, stories, and personal ephemera. In some cases, he said a person's entire life and existence was reduced to, if not nothing but a death certificate writing on a napkin that found its way into a donation box. Yeah. So of course, we fully recognize that it is difficult for many of our collaborators to share their stories. There's a tendency to assume that oral history collection is celebratory and harmless. However, this is very difficult work to do, and we are sensitive to that, to the point that we have looked at our forms, which were pretty standard, and have changed them to be more sensitive to issues of identity and allowing a wider berth for people just want to give us an interview and maybe hold on to it for a little while. Let's move on. So I'll just go ahead and conclude. There's so much to say. The Arkansas Drag Community Oral History Project is a work in progress, but it's important work in progress. It's an important work in progress. And while materials will be donated to repositories when possible, we are hoping that this project provides some post-custodial empowerment to marginalized communities and to young scholars, like Mary Claire Durr at UA Fayetteville, who collected interviews as part of her forthcoming honors thesis, and community organizations like NWA Equality, which has an archive of its own, but they need assistance and training and resources to capture their own history. We also hope that this project will decrease sort of institutional siloing, creating and nurturing dialogues between institutions that will increase knowledge of collections and resources in Arkansas and across the region. The queer history of Arkansas is not a secret anymore, and it's time to let the community set their own narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deena. We will now go to Tamela Tenpenny-Lewis.
Hello, everyone. I'd first like to thank the Arkansas Historical Association for allowing me to present to you today. My presentation, What Becomes of the Brokenhearted, The Invisible Life of Lynn Harris. This presentation sweeps you through the life of Arkansas's own and New York Times best-selling author, Lynn. In his writings, his works address the intersections of class, race, homophobia, and sexuality. A prolific author of popular fiction, his novels were semi-autobiographical. Excuse me, I just messed that up. His novels were semi-autobiographical, in that he was the first to tell the difficult stories of closeted Black gay men in a way that crossed over to a heterosexual audience. His writings in the early 90s addressed issues that few others were talking about in literature, or about closeted gay men, about HIV or AIDS. This little boy from Little Rock shares an extraordinary depiction of the lives of gay men centered around his signature theme of love, friendship, and family. This best-selling author wowed, charmed, and romanced millions of readers. This is a brief introduction of how he got there. What Becomes of the Brokenhearted, The Invisible Life of Lynn Harris. Taking from his memoir, I wanted the first line of my memoir to be, of course, there's something on my screen that I can't see that, okay. I wanted the first line of my memoir to be brilliant, something poetic that would linger after the final page had been turned. But I learned that life brings you only lightning-like bursts of brilliance, and they are rarely lyrical. There is no other way to say it. I tried to kill myself one humid summer evening. Thank God I didn't succeed. Lynn was born on June 20th, 1955 in Clinton, Michigan, to Etta Mae Williams and James Jeter. When Lynn was 3, he moved with his mother to Little Rock, Arkansas. She later married Ben Otis Harris, who helped raise Lynn until they divorced when he was 13. At the time of the divorce, Lynn had 3 younger sisters. In his youth, he frequented the public library in Little Rock and fell in love with the writings of James Baldwin and Maya Angelou. He also worked at the Little Rock Zoo, Baskin Robbins, Arkansas Paper Company, and M.M. Cone. He used his income to buy clothes and school supplies. He attended Forest Heights Junior High and graduated from Hall High School in Little Rock in 1973. Upon graduation, he furthered his education and attended the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. Lynn was very busy while a student at Fayetteville, but one of the things that he felt was important as a student was, and he said, "I've made it my goal to get as much out of college as I possibly can and encourage others to do the same. I think there is more to these years than just making grades. Organizations and personal involvement gives you a glimpse at the real world that no book or classroom could even begin to touch on. I think the university has a lot to give to us, but I also believe that we as students have a lot to give back to the university." Lynn, in this photograph, his picture of being selected to the University of Arkansas Hall of Fame. He was a 1977 graduate. He was a journalist, the public relations major, and the recipient of the Bad Service Award, Sigma Delta Chi and Arkansas Press Association scholarships, and was named to Cardinal 20 Motor Board. He was on the board of the Order of Omega, which was the fraternal order that all of the officers of the Greek organizations were part of, Phi Eta Sigma and the Dean's List. He was active in various activities. He served as the editor of the 1977 Razorback, and you see the cover on the right side of the screen of that yearbook. And he was also the first Black to become a head of the publication. He was a production supervisor of the 1976 Razorback. He was the vice president of BAD and treasurer. He was also the ASG press secretary and the Bad Times editor. Lynn went on to become a Razorback cheerleader and served on other boards and positions. Here is a photo of the Order of Omega, and you can see him in the photograph wearing his letters of his fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha. And then this is the picture of his as a graduating senior. The Kappa Kappa chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha was chartered April 27th, 1975. And you can see during the year of 1977, Lynn was an officer serving as the Rush chairman. And here are a couple of pictures from the yearbook of him and his cheerleading squad. At that time, Lynn was a senior from this picture, and Dion Harrell was his cheerleading partner, and she was a freshman in 1977. So following graduation, Lynn sold computers for IBM and other companies for 13 years. And during this time, he lived in Dallas, Texas, New York City, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, Georgia. In 1999, the University of Arkansas honored him with a citation of distinguished alumni for outstanding professional achievement and other honors, which included the Sprague Toads Literary Award, the Harvey Milk Honorary Diploma, and the Silas Hunt Legacy Award for outstanding achievement from the U of A. He returned in the fall of 2003 to teach literature and writing in the Department of English, and he served as cheer coach for the Arkansas Razorbacks cheerleading squad. For his class on contemporary Black authors, he brought in authors as guest speakers. He also taught a class focused on Black female writers. He lived in Fayetteville while he taught at the university, but he also had homes in Houston, Texas, and Atlanta at the time. For years, he kept his sexuality, kept his sexual orientation hidden, and this led to depression and heavy drinking. And in August of 1990, while he lived in Washington, D.C., he attempted suicide by ingesting a mixture of champagne, vodka, and sleeping pills. He soon got sober and managed his depression with medication and therapy. He bought a computer and started writing his first book, which proved to be very therapeutic. While Lynn lived in Atlanta, he self-published his novel, Invisible Life, in 1991. And while he did not have an editor, publisher, he distributed the book himself from out of the back of his car, and he hand delivered the book to Black-owned bookstores and beauty salons. So he captured an audience of Black females from the beginning. And, you know, and the book captured was so captivating because it talked about topics that were taboo at the time. Now, in Invisible Life, the main character was Tyler. And in this, Raymond discovers his bisexuality and struggles to accept his true desires. So torn between his married male lover and his girlfriend, he struggles to identify as a bisexual Black man, but he ultimately settles into gay life. While much of the novel is dedicated to Tyler's reflection of that choice, but Invisible Life caught the eye of eventually Invisible Life caught the eye of a Doubleday sales representative who bought a copy and sent it to the publishing house. And eventually, Lynn made a presentation to the company officials who signed him for a 3-book deal and with Anchor Books, which is an imprint of Doubleday. So here, this cover of Invisible Life was the one that he sold and self-published. And then after he received his book deal, you can see there was several other variations of the cover. So we have Invisible Life from 1994, which is the second book. And then the 5th anniversary is the book to the right, and that is the cover for Invisible Life. And as mentioned, he had a book deal with Doubleday for 3 books, and his second book that came out in 1994 was Just As I Am, his second novel, and it is the sequel to Invisible Life. And these books were written during the height of the AIDS epidemic, and the book continues to follow the life of Raymond Winston Tyler and his former lover, Nicole Springer. This Too Shall Pass was the 3rd book. And you can see where these books were nominated for Outstanding American Novels. Authors' books about Black gay community take a look at both sides. So as you can see, this is a article from the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and in it, Lynn comes to Arkansas, and this is in March of 1996, where he's holding a book signing. He was there in Arkansas for 2 days and doing book signings, and he had his first book signing at Pyramid Gallery and Books with the owner, Garbo Hearn, who has been a lifetime friend of Lynn's. And I want to express that as you see the books that are signed, the wonderful thing about him is that he had a loyalty to those individuals that were with him during the time before he started, before he received his book deals. And throughout the course of his career and 15 books, I believe, Lynn still signed the books. You could tell during the course of time that the conversations, the writings kind of weren't as much wording, but the sentiment was the same. His love and devotion to his fans and his friends. In his next book, which was, let's see. Okay, so and This Too Shall Pass, the novel. He has a list of characters that are interesting, and I won't give you a whole lot of information about them because I'd like for you to read the books. But as you can see from the newspaper articles, he was moving up, and getting write-ups with on the bestseller list with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Publishers Weekly. And the characters in this book were very interesting people. Zurich had dreams. Tamela had secrets. John had questions. Mia had demons. And Mama C had answers. Oh, Mama C was a character. And I mean, she was able to tell you about yourself and put you in place, and a very interesting, needed older lady character. But among his other novels, If This World Were Mine, 1977, Abide With Me, 1999, Not a Day Goes By, 2000, Anyway the Wind Blows, 2001, A Love of My Own, 2002, and I Say a Little Prayer, 2006. His books tell ultimately the optimistic stories that explore friendships, careers, romance, sexuality, and race. He wrote with an ear for Black dialect, with descriptions, slang terms, and dialogue. Just As I Am, Anyway the Wind Blows, and A Love of My Own all won Novel of the Year designations by the Blackboard African American Bestsellers. And in 1997, If This World Were Mine won the James Baldwin Award for Literary Excellence. His memoir, What Becomes of the Brokenhearted, which he wrote over a period of 7 years, was published in 2003. And in 2000, a musical based on Not a Day Goes By toured nationally. And as a lecturer, he spoke at colleges across the country. He wrote articles for Sports Illustrated, Essence, the Washington Post, Sunday Magazine, the New York Times, Book Review, the Constitution, and the Advocate, and the list goes on. The Arkansas Black Hall of Fame. Lynn was inducted with the class of 2000. The Arkansas Black Hall of Fame was founded in 1992 by Charles Stewart and Patricia Goodwin as a means of recognizing the best and brightest African Americans with Arkansas roots. The first induction ceremony was held on October 30th, 1993 in the exhibition hall of Robinson Auditorium. Each year, 6 inductees from diverse fields of endeavor are recognized for their contribution to African American culture and to the nation. Lynn was inducted in the class of the year 2000. And as you can see, the other recipients that were inducted with him. This is a newspaper article from the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette when he came to, during the period of time that he was lecturing and writing, and he came to Little Rock and to do book signings as well, and had a book signing on May 21st of that year at Pyramid Books, and then also one at Barnes and Noble. And this book, I Say a Little Prayer, was out at that time. And one of the things you might notice too, when you look at his list of books and the titles, they have a song. You know, a lot of when you go back and look at them, I'd like for you at a later point to listen to the lyrics of some of the different songs. You know, I say a little prayer, if this world were mine, and etc. In every book, Lynn acknowledges and gives thanks to his Savior, first of all, the Lord Jesus Christ. He expresses his sincere gratitude for his family and friends who supported him when nobody knew his name. He extends his appreciation to his mother, who taught him to be grateful and humble, and his special aunt, Miss Jessie Phillips, who taught him the power of love. That was a song too, I believe, and so many others. Acknowledging that while there were so many to mention over the course of time, he said, he would say, there's so many of you that have done so much for me. So I don't have to name you because you know who you are. But acknowledging the sororities and fraternities and the just the friends throughout his career, he was very grateful to his editors and his publishers. And the reason why I have this slide before you to explain is when he did his first book signing here in '96. And there was a young lady by the name of Taylor who attended the book signing. She was 3 months old. And as you can see in the autograph, and this too shall pass, he writes the autograph and says, P.S. Good luck to Taylor Alexis. She was born in January, so the book signing she was actually 2 months old at the time. And I did have a picture of Lynn holding her at the book signing, but I couldn't find it. But anyway, so as you can see through the course of time, he signed that book for her in '94. The book signing was in '96. I mean, the book was in '94. He signed it in '96. And then you can see later in 1999, his book, Just As I Am, he autographed to her, saying that she was a special lady. And, this was something for her as she got older. But one of the other things is that you will find a lot of characters in his books that are friends of his, fact or fiction. And in his book, Basketball Jones, that was published in 2009, and actually Lynn was on tour promoting the book at the time of his death. You see, if you read the paragraph, that he had a special character in the book by the name of Tenpenny, who was a blogger in the book. So again, over the years, he kept, loyalty to friends and family. So as we wind down, I want to also bring attention to Lynn's Angels. It was written, and it's the true story of E. Lynn Harris and the women who loved him. In this book, they tell the remarkable story of more than 30 years of friendship between he and the 5 women who comprised the family that he invented for himself, that he called Lynn's Angels. These women were with him as he struggled with his own identity during his darkest days, as he began to be true to himself, as he found his voice, and as he climbed the ladder of success. To the right is from his obituary or his funeral program when he passed, and you see the word of comfort, and those angels are listed there. This is also parts of his funeral program. So Arkansas says goodbye to literary ambassador E. Lynn Harris. Eddie Harris gently tucked the satin cloth around her son, best-selling author E. Lynn Harris, inside his coffin. With the help of funeral attendants, his casket was closed for the last time. More than 400 people attended his funeral at Gaines Street Baptist Church in Little Rock. He died at the age of 54 of complications from heart disease on July 23rd. And if you notice, there is the letter E with his books displayed in the E initial. So in conclusion, I'd like to leave you with this last thought of Everett Lynn Harris. My heart knows who I am and who I'll turn out to be. We are privileged. I am privileged to have known him, to have been a friend, and to have been touched and blessed by him. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamela. We will now go to our final speaker, Dr. Todd Lewis. And be sure and put your questions in the chat if you have any. Dr. Lewis?
Okay, just wanted to say 3 quick things. First, this is my first virtual conference. I didn't realize that I could have, done a PowerPoint. Second, it's an awful lot of material to condense into a 15-minute paper. And so there will be an awful lot of detail and nuances that are missing. And finally, Dr. Hyman indicated an interest in attending this session, so he may be in the audience, in which case I welcome him. So let's start. On June 14th, 1988, one man stood alone in Little Rock's Excelsior Hotel ballroom before an audience of 600. For some members, his presence caused discomfort and even hostility. Terrified, the man announced, "I am a homosexual," words that had never been spoken before so many people in Arkansas. The event, the annual Arkansas Community Services Awards, celebrated the sacrifices and achievements of determined citizens. These citizens included the man, Dr. Ralph A. Hyman, a psychological counselor whose clientele included people struggling with issues related to gender and sexuality, who was being honored for his pioneering efforts against AIDS. A native Californian, Hyman moved to Little Rock in 1978 upon receiving an internship as part of his doctoral studies at Auburn University. Finishing his doctoral degree in 1980, he remained in Arkansas despite its religiously conservative population. Hyman engendered suspicion and hostility among many Arkansans because he was, in their minds, an unrepentant homosexual who promoted the gay lifestyle through his activism. Conservative evangelicals believed that Hyman's efforts to educate the public about AIDS were dangerous because they spread homosexuality. Many members of the Arkansas General Assembly refused to fund the kind of education taught by Hyman. But he also met resistance in the state's gay male community, as many men refused to change their sexual behavior. The various obstacles confronting Hyman seemed insurmountable. Nevertheless, he dedicated himself to the fight against AIDS. Initially called GRID, or gay-related immune deficiency, AIDS became inextricably linked to homosexuality in the minds of Americans. It appeared at a moment when the notion of the homosexual menace had become thoroughly ingrained in the nation's consciousness. The early 1970s had witnessed an energized gay and lesbian rights movement. In response, conservative Christians have responded, using rhetoric that demonized gay men and lesbians. For instance, Jerry Falwell, head of the Moral Majority, proclaimed that AIDS was a lethal judgment of God on the sin of homosexuality, and conjured up images of armies of homosexuals marching in the streets of big cities who were out after my children and your children. Such statements intensified already existing anti-LGBT sentiment, conditioning the heterosexual community's response to the AIDS epidemic. The first deaths from AIDS in Arkansas were reported in June 1983. By that time, Hyman was already engaged in the fray. He became aware of AIDS from the Village Voice, a newspaper published in New York, which reported that young gay men in the prime of their lives were dying, with the average length of time between diagnosis and death being only weeks. Soon afterwards, he began receiving calls from Little Rock hospitals, requesting him to visit young men suffering from the disorder. Many people feared that they could catch it by casual contact, and protocols required that anyone entering a patient's room had to wear gloves and a gown. This dehumanizing treatment appalled Hyman, who believed these young men didn't need visits by people who would not hold their hands or give them hugs. Instead, they needed to be treated as human beings, not aliens. He dispensed with the gloves and gowns. Hyman observed that people living with AIDS, or PWAs, experienced high levels of stress caused by fearfulness surrounding the new disease and its mortality rate. This and the stigma attached to both homosexuality and AIDS resulted in many PWAs refusing to seek medical help. Among members of Little Rock's gay community, Hyman found a widespread concern about AIDS. Their responses ranged from fearful celibacy to committed fidelity. Many men chose to decrease their number of sexual contacts. However, others, including some PWAs, ignored the warnings. They continued to conduct their sexual lives as though nothing were wrong. Hyman began offering his services to PWAs, with clientele including not just homosexual or bisexual men, but others as well. He created a support group for patients suffering from AIDS and circulated his home telephone number. He spoke about AIDS at press conference and the annual Gay Pride celebration. He discussed it on television and made presentations to the state health department, university classes, and civic and professional groups. Visiting the New York City's gay men's health crisis in 1985, which had pioneered strategies and programs, he copied their programs, including its buddy system. The system matched people who wanted to help people with AIDS. According to Hyman, the experience proved incredibly rewarding for both the PWA and the buddy. In late 1985, Hyman co-founded the Arkansas AIDS Foundation, which increased the number of educators and ran an AIDS hotline. To operate, the AAF required money and private donations were inadequate. One possible source of funds was a grant from the Centers for Disease Control. In 1986, the AAF applied for such a grant, receiving $8,800. The AAF's proposed program would fund 30 classes instructing gay men and bisexual men about safer sex practices, print related literature and posters, and facilitate the placement of condoms in local gay bars that served a gay clientele. Grant funds were to be administered through the Arkansas Department of Health and had to be used by April 1987. Unfortunately, the state legislature's Joint Budget Committee had to approve how the funds were to be used, and several members objected to the program on the grounds that it would encourage homosexual behavior. In December 1986, a subcommittee met to discuss the grant. A heated debate ensued in which opponents insisted that the program should call for abstinence by gay and bisexual men. One legislator called for a very hard line to stop the spread of AIDS, including testing male patrons of gay bars for HIV, as well as quarantining PWAs. The grant's most vocal supporter among the legislators indicated that he was most concerned about the spread of AIDS into the heterosexual community. The debate ended with no decisions made. Hyman responded to the hearing with an open letter to the state legislators. He pointed out that there could be as many as 4,000 cases of AIDS virus infection in the state. He warned that crossover transmission to heterosexuals would increase daily. He characterized calls for abstinence as simply naive. For people throughout history had found ways to overcome any obstacle to engage in sex. He asserted that people simply did not abstain from sex, which when prescribed went underground, where it flourished in more and more pathological forms. He believed the state had two choices: either educate gay men and others in safe sexual practices and decrease the spread of AIDS, or follow the lead of those who demanded abstinence and watch cases of infection double yearly. Ultimately, the AAF agreed to a compromise plan stressing abstinence as the only foolproof method of avoiding infection, and received the grant. For Hyman's continuing efforts, he received the Community Service Award in 1988. He used his acceptance speech both to promote his latest project and challenge the negative image of lesbians and gay men. By choosing to recognize my work, he asserted, Arkansas is recognizing AIDS and the homosexual community publicly for the first time. He ended any speculation about his sexual orientation. I am a homosexual, he proclaimed. I work with homosexual males who have AIDS. He considered it sad that it took such a debilitating disease for Arkansas to finally acknowledge the needs of the gay male and lesbian community. But by honoring a homosexual as a vital, helpful part of the community, he spoke, this recognition had at last come to pass. Hyman concluded his speech with a call for 70 angels to donate $100 each to help with his latest project, the Kramer House for People with AIDS, or AIDS House. The house was intended to help alleviate the problem of homelessness among PWAs, which in part resulted from a continued dispute over how AIDS spread. People feared they could catch it from casual contact with PWAs, and in some cases, their intimate partners rejected them. PWAs found themselves either fired from jobs or otherwise unable to work. And as bills piled up, they lost their homes. Though Hyman had talked to various individuals about establishing the house, nobody was willing to do it. Therefore, he decided to go ahead and do it on his own, purchasing a house and furnishing it with donated furniture. After the house had been established, the AAF took over its management. However, by that time, negative experiences had begun to sour Hyman on the AAF and organized activism. Hyman had envisioned a foundation staffed by volunteers, but other AAF members decided that there should be full-time paid employees with well-furnished office space. A running dispute ensued, which came to a head in early 1989 when Hyman learned that very little of the foundation's money, 10%, less than 10% according to Hyman, went to assist PWAs. Instead, most funds were used to pay salaries and rent. In protest, Hyman resigned from the AAF's board of directors, ending his affiliation with the foundation. Without his consent, the AAF closed AIDS House in 1991. Despite his problems with the AAF, Hyman remained undaunted. and took advantage of another opportunity to educate the public about AIDS and homosexuality. The 1990 Democratic primary. He entered the race for state representative from District 59, adopting a broad liberal platform, which included a call for AIDS education and insurance laws protecting PWAs. It also called for the repeal of the sodomy law. Mark Pryor, the son of Senator David Pryor, won the election, receiving 56.13% of 12,698 votes cast. Hyman finished fourth, garnering the support of 1,105 people, or 8.7% of the voters. Despite the tragedy, Hyman's final assessment of the AIDS epidemic was that it was the best thing that could have happened to gay men, for it humanized them. He believed that the gay man became a heartbreaking and heart-rending image for mothers to reach out to assist, to love, making people feel empathy and compassion for them. As a result, people would no longer see them only as men trying to molest other men in public restrooms. Rather, they were people, human beings, little different from others.
Thank you, Todd. Everybody else wants to turn on your cameras. We do have some questions in. One for Deena, and actually I have a follow-up on this one. Deena, is there any consideration of perhaps working with the UALR theater program or perhaps other museums to collect drag costumes? And then I was wondering where the oral histories are going to be housed.
Yeah, so, and there has been a lot of talk about the drag costumes. We haven't had a huge conversation about that, because I think there have been some community organizations that, and a lot of people have been preserving them for themselves. So that's sort of this sort of post-custodial idea of archives, where we work in tandem with people to help them help themselves, so we don't clog up archives with materials, because the costumes take up space. But the conversation's there. So the short answer is no. But the long answer is we think about it all the time. And I think theater programs and museums, yeah, I think it'd be wonderful if that became a collection priority. That's one of the other aims of this project, is to sort of put it out there that this is a collection need across the board. So because it's kind of been neglected in general. And Mark, where are they going to be housed? Wherever they will fit and whoever wants them. My interviews in particular are welcome at the special collections at UA Fayetteville. Other people are also welcome to submit them to that repository as well. The NWA Equality does keep kind of its own cache of oral history interviews, and other archives around the state, I believe, also have them already. So the idea is just spread the word and tell the stories. We want to get resources out there. The community scholars program through AFTA helps people do oral history training and gives them access to physical equipment that they can use to go out and collect oral histories. So we're really just trying to get people out in the world collecting it, and however it gets preserved. Yes, Todd just said if I would provide contact info. I'm going to put that in the chat. It was on my last slide and I completely forgot to show that last slide, as happens. But I'm putting the email address in the chat for anybody who wants to send me more questions, or if you have any ideas. Like in my bio, it says I'm an amateur at all of this. My credentials is I worked in special collections for 4 years. I worked in book publishing for several years. So I'm sort of adjacent to scholarship, but I'm not really a scholar. So any help you can provide is very welcome to me. So yes.
We have a question. Is anyone aware of efforts to document and preserve buildings associated with the LGBTQ+ experience in Arkansas? Buildings built in 72 or earlier are considered historic. I'd love to get input from the speakers on significant buildings to help preserve and help tell this important story. That from Rachel Patton, the AHA Vice President and the President of, or the Director of Preserve Arkansas. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Todd said he's unaware of any efforts. I am also unaware of any efforts. I think anything like that. I know we have historic preservation efforts in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Particularly, we have a whole committee on it through our city. I don't know if the Arkansas Historic Preservation people. there's a whole organization for that. I don't know if there is a push for that. So I think that would be a really great idea. If there's not, at least doing a survey of what buildings are historic for the LGBTQIA+ community would be a really great start.
I'd like to add that there really aren't any buildings that we're aware of, unless they're like personal houses, like now possibly the Finger House, or, you know, that really have that connection. I'm not sure about the origins of the Discovery Complex. So that's the bar associated with Norman Jones, Norma Christie, and Little Rock. I know that here, you know, gay bars tend to just come and go when facilities are available. For instance, a very prominent bar in Fayetteville, Ron's Place, closed down maybe 15 years ago or so, and now it's like used as a warehouse. And so, you know, unfortunately not, you know, as people discover more about members of the state's LGBTQ+ community, then, you know, maybe additional houses or whatever can be added to that.
I agree. And I think, you know, a survey of some of those spaces. So the Discovery Club occasionally does come up for sale. I think the last time I checked, they were trying to sell it. And so who knows what will become of it. And it is an extraordinarily significant place. So if it does get sold and it gets torn apart, or if it gets turned into something else, it would be nice to at least have had that documented. And also maybe put a plaque or something there, some sort of interpretation in that area. Just so people know that this happened here, that to bring awareness to that in this space, this, you know, this history is there.
We have a question for Tamela. I may have missed it, but did you say when or what age Elin Harris came out?
I did not say, and I'm not exactly sure when he did. You know, I knew him from the time I was a child, and because he, you know, was good friends with some cousins of mine, Beverly and Valerie Rice, and I, you know, would be with them a lot, and because Lynn's a couple of years older than me. So, but anyway, I'm not exactly sure. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. There's a lot of good information in the chat. Danielle's pointing out that that our COWS branches have oral history kits that can be checked out if you're wanting to pursue some of those oral histories. Shallow Museum is happy to support the oral history project and perhaps the costume. I think that's about all the questions I have that I see in the chat. Let me remind everybody again, if you don't mind staying for a few minutes after the session ends to answer the survey. That will be very helpful to the Board of Trustees of the AHA. And I want to thank Deena, Tamela, and Todd for an outstanding panel. This has been great. I'll remind everybody too that at 2:30, our next session will be held, Arkansas Identities, the Arkansas History Series by the University of Arkansas Press.
Mark, I had one
Yes.
more thing I wanted to add.
Please.
The truth of the matter is that researching LGBT history in Arkansas is very difficult. To my knowledge, there's only 4 collections that have significant materials related to the community. As Deena pointed out, a lot of the things are coded. And there's just generations and generations of people who never were able to write their experiences for whatever reason. I was checking it out. A person who was 18 in 1945 is now 95 years old. And, you know, another thing with regards to the Arkansas AIDS Foundation, there were 3 founders. Of that, the first, you know, one of them died by about 1988. Another one who's president of the foundation died in 1991. And there's just so many people who were involved in the movement who have simply left state. So, you know, on the other hand, it's something other than the Thompson and the Shores book now, on which, you know, there's not anything been done on it. So
Thank you for that, Dr.
Right on, Todd. Thank you.
Well, if no other questions, I'd like to thank our speakers once more and thank everybody for showing up. And we'll see you at the next session.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
thanks.